Okay, so let me tell you where we're at so far in this game because I already played the 1861 Summer 1 term. So the first half of 1861 is over. I'm just going to go through theater by theater. If you don't know, this game is actually broken up by theaters: East, West, and Trans Mississippi. That matters a little bit because depending on your dice differential, if your dice differential is really low, it's one. You don't get one activation. You get one activation per theater. So it kind of controls the tempo of the game a little bit in these different theaters. Also, whenever you have a very complicated, not complicated, detailed, let's say detailed schedule of different commanders and generals and leaders that are going to come on the board different turns, and they're going to go to specific theaters. At least initially, they're going to be assigned to specific theaters. You can of course move troops between theaters. You're not constrained in that respect. But in any event, let me go through and just describe what happened in the first turn. In the first four action phases, the first action cycle, in the east at least, it was a little complicated up here. It doesn't look like too much different from the original setup of the 1861 scenario, except that McClellan is here in the district, sitting in a fortification where, historically McClellan was very happy to sit in fortifications around the District of Washington. Uh, the District of Columbia, excuse me. So what happened was initially McDowell sent troops, and they started out with 1 SP in Alexandria, which is an optional rule. Initially, McDowell sent troops up northwest of Alexandria, northeast of Beauregard's position now and Beauregard's position then. But Beauregard successfully intercepted those troops and repulsed them back to D.C. Then on the Federalists' next turn, because they had the initiative before the Confederates did, they were able to take Manassas Junction with another stack of troops. So essentially, Beauregard was stuck up against the Potomac and some mountains in the west, in that northern hex right here. So that's a precarious position for him because he was absolutely out of supply. He was entirely sort of isolated in his position, and if he had been attacked again, which he was, and if he lost, he couldn't actually retreat. It would have been impossible for him to satisfy the retreat requirements, and he would have had to have surrendered. That would have been a huge coup, so it was a chance that the North was willing to take. It didn't work. But Beauregard still found himself surrounded when his next turn began, so when his next phase began. But he was able to break through back to Manassas Junction. He re-entrenched himself, and he repulsed even the troops from Alexandria. So they have the situation you have now is the northern forces are back across the Potomac under the very cautious command, historically speaking at least, of McClellan, and nothing happened with Patterson and Johnston out in Harper's Ferry. They didn't move at all. They're just sitting behind their fortifications. They're very happy to do so. Presently, we have Longstreet with not a lot of troops hanging out here in the Alleghenies in a valleyway there, just 1 SP. Meanwhile, Stuart is here in eastern West Virginia with 1 SP. Burnside is sitting in Charleston. What happened was some troops were able to shuttle over from Cincinnati, cross into West Virginia, come down and take Charleston just by the skin of their teeth from some entrenched West Virginia militia. Meanwhile, now it's McDowell, but it had been McClellan who was in command of these troops. Just a little bit of fuzz on you, McDowell. You need to shave. There were some troops that were under the command of McClellan that came down from Pittsburgh to Wheeling to Grafton. So at the end of the last turn, West Virginia actually devolved to Union control completely because they were able to secure control of all of the resource hexes in West Virginia. Meanwhile, you see that the North has fortified some of these points along the Ohio River in Cincinnati, New Albany, and Evansville. I don't literally mean fortified. They actually entrenched here in Evansville because they had an activation with nothing really productive to do with it, so you might as well just entrench some of your troops. But you can see that they're set up to invade Kentucky if they should feel the need to do so. Now, Kentucky is neutral at the start of the war. At the beginning of 1862, if no one has violated that neutrality, it will come in on the side of the Union. So there is oftentimes going to be a push by Southern forces at the end of 1861 to invade Kentucky and try to grab the resource hexes that they can before they all just automatically become Northern federal-controlled hexes. Or at least to be prepared at the beginning of 1862 to launch such an invasion. These troops are there just to be ready in case a Southern invasion comes, but you can see that there's not a lot of Southern activity along the border with Tennessee here, so there's not much chance of that. Hardee is sitting in Clarksville with 2 SPs. Johnston is a little more fortified, or a little more capable. Johnston and Polk And, you know, Johnson has a pretty good combat rating of 2 there, but he's only sitting there with 2 SPs, and he's guarding the river with some naval weapons there. You'll notice this Federal flotilla here in New Madrid, Missouri, and I realize that, you know, Madrid, Spain is pronounced that way, but if you find yourself in New Madrid, you should pronounce it that way, and things will go easier for you. Meanwhile, Halleck just got assigned to this stack of troops in Cairo, and again, I know it looks like Cairo, but if you find yourself there, call it Cairo, and things will go easier for you. Meanwhile, in Missouri, there was some fighting. Leon is down, or I guess Lyon, I don't know, he was Irish, so I don't know how you'd pronounce that. Lyon is dead. He was a very capable commander. He ended up attacking Price, who had a smaller force, who was entrenched in Springfield. Odds were pretty even. That battle could have gone either way, and it just didn't go the Union's way, which actually sort of historically happened. So Price is still there. Curtis has taken Lyon's place after another engagement sort of on the border here between Missouri and Arkansas, trying to keep these strength points from reinforcing Price and or just generally causing trouble in Southwest and hopefully, from the CSA player's perspective, Western Missouri. And you can see that Fremont, this cautious general, has moved down to Rolla by rail. I know it looks like Rolla, but again, if you find yourself there, call it Rolla. Things will be easier for you. You have another SP here in Waynesville that's just sort of heading towards the fray in the Trans-Mississippi. I kind of like how this game breaks up the map into these different theaters and sometimes enforces you to take actions in some theaters, because I feel like the Trans-Mississippi theater would be largely neglected if it weren't for that rule by a lot of players. So currently, you see that, I forgot to mention, that Federal flotilla that's in New Madrid, Missouri, is there because in the long term, the CSA has a real disadvantage in ocean-going naval power. I don't know if you'd call it naval river power. So what they did is they took a boat that started out in Memphis and tried to sort of secure or lure the North into a battle here in New Madrid. And even odds, hoping that they could win it, they could shuttle some troops across and try to establish a fortress there to help push their control of the river sort of up towards Cairo, Illinois, with the ultimate intent of, you know, challenging Cairo. It's somewhat complicated by the fact that you can't go through Kentucky without really pissing it off early on, but nevertheless, that was the goal. It just didn't work out. Currently, though, things aren't all bad, because there is under construction, there is a ironclad in Memphis that was determined at the end of the turn by a sort of random roll on the Southern Naval Reinforcements chart. So this is the status of the game as we have it now. I've rolled for the first action phase of the second turn, and you see we have a dice differential of 5, and the Union took the initiative. So it's the Union's turn to act here, and they have to push on towards Richmond, which is to say they have to attack a hex in Virginia. So we'll see how they work that out, if they're going to do it or not, if they're just going to sacrifice an SP to throw it somewhere. But unfortunately, attacking Longstreet or Stewart wouldn't satisfy either of those requirements, because they're in West Virginia. No, actually, Longstreet is east of the Allegheny Mountains, so he's in the Shenandoah Valley, I guess, so technically he would be a legitimate target. So that's pretty tempting, actually, from the northern player's perspective. But let me go through this action phase, and I'll let you know how things panned out. And I showed a quick view of this chart here, but I should go through and explain a little more to see how we're doing. Currently, the South has 96 BPs, 96 build points. Nothing has happened to the blockade track from the original 1861 setting, because we're playing with that house rule that limits, that sort of ramps up naval transport capacity of both sides throughout the war. So this will be the first turn, actually, that the North is able to transport any, or to conduct any amphibious invasion of any southern ports or islands that might have an effect on that blockade chart. The North has 4 VPs because of activities that it carried out in grabbing resource hexes in West Virginia. Currently, there are 2 arsenal BPs out on the map. The South gets to place these arsenals throughout the game to sort of add to their productive capacity, which indicates or represents Southern what's the word I'm looking for? Efforts during the war to establish a sort of industrial capacity that it historically lacked. And then the maintenance marker is still at 10. That's not likely to increase for a while yet. The maintenance marker indicates the general health of the Southern economy. I think in the rules it says specifically inflation. But as this northern blockade tightened on the southern states, their economic situation got more and more precarious, so the financial capacity that they did have was even less and less effective in that way. So, all right, let's see what happens.